In this video, we're going to look at the voicing assistant, the different modes it works in, and listen to a couple of examples. Now, the idea here with this drop-down menu is that it lets you select one of 5 available voicing modes, and these voicing modes determine how the notes that you trigger on your keyboard are going to be distributed between the individual instruments that you have set up in the 4 slots over here. Now, to start with, we have polyphonic mode, and this is kind of the standard type of playback that we're used to from most samplers, where each note you play triggers all the instruments that are currently in the section setup. So this will sound most familiar to you. But the really hip, well, depending on what you're doing, but hip kind of unique special mode that's available in Session Horns Pro is Smart Voice Split mode over here. And this will split the notes up realistically amongst the instruments in the section setup. So in this example here, I'm playing a 4-note chord. It'll split it up in the 4 notes from low to high like that. And the order and the number of the available voices is always consistent. So with 4 instruments, we have it 1 on each voice. And if you add an extra note, it'll basically choke one of the other notes sort of intelligently. And it uses what's called a polyphonic legato to create natural sounding legato phrases. We're going to look at that in the legato mode, which is next, but it's available in this as well. But polyphonic legato is one of the really special features of Session Horns Pro. It creates natural sounding legato phrases by using dedicated legato transition samples for when you're playing long lines, the way one note transitions into the other. Which brings us to the next mode, which is legato mode. Now this is used for monophonic playback only, so you can only have one note sounding at a time, and it uses these dedicated legato transition samples. So each note triggers all the sounds in the setup here. It's kind of like polyphonic mode in that all the sounds are triggered, but it's great for a unison line. But it has these nice legato transition samples. So the idea when you're using this mode is to overlap the notes, the length of the notes so they overlap, and that way they trigger the transition samples. We'll look and listen in a moment. And next we have chord plus legato, and this is like legato mode, but it's not monophonic, it's polyphonic. It allows for chords to be played at the same time as these legato melodies with these transition samples. So you can simultaneously play chords and the monophonic melody. And to generate the legato sounding melody, like in legato mode, you need to overlap the notes slightly. And again, each note of the chord is played by all the instruments in this mode. And finally, the last mode we have is animator mode, and that plays back the dedicated phrases that we set up here. We're not going to look at that in this video. All right, so that's the technical part. Let's look and listen. Now, here's the first example, and I have a 4-note chord here. I'm going to play it in polyphonic mode, and basically all notes are going to play, or all instruments rather, are going to play all of the notes, and it's going to sound nice and big and full. So that's kind of what we're used to hearing. Play one note, and it triggers everything. Now, if we go to Smart Voice Split, it's going to allocate them. It's going to not sound quite as big and full, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's going to distribute the notes amongst the instruments. Versus this mode. So you get a more realistic voicing. Now let's go to our next example, and here I have just a straight legato melody. You can see all the notes here. Let's play it once as is, and I'm going to play it in the legato mode, and then we'll look more closely at what's happening. So let's look at this in a graphic editor, and we can see that I've overlapped all the notes so that they're starting while the previous one is still sounding technically. And by doing this, it's triggering these legato transition samples. So you hear the way it kind of slides up from one note to the other. Let's listen again. And if we were in polyphonic mode, we won't hear those transitions. Now, again, in legato, we hear that little subtle slide up or down. So that really adds a sense of realism in terms of how horn players phrase these types of legato passages. Now here's the next example, and this is chord and legato mode, and this allows for polyphonic playback, meaning we can hear chords, and I have chords happening here with a melody on top, and again, these melody notes you can see I have all slightly overlapping. Doesn't need to be by a lot, but just slightly overlapping so that we get those transition samples triggered. And in the score, this is what it looks like. Let's listen. And you'll notice these last two notes, I've set the velocity fairly high, so it's triggering the velocity switch here. So this is respected in this mode. So very powerful mode to play in if you're going to be using chords and a melodic moving line in the same part. And again, all the notes are triggering all the sounds here. And the melody uses these legato samples. So those are the voicing assistant modes. And in the next video, we're going to continue and we're going to look at smart chords.